Hey y'all, Melissa here with you today, and today we are going to be covering serger basics. If you just got a serger or overlocker machine, these are two different brands and models of the same type of machine. We are going to be covering the basics of how to use this machine. Now, what is a serger for? Do you need one even? I use my serger all the time. This one here is my main serger now. This one was my starter serger when I first started. And what a serger does is it creates this looped thread finish to finish off seams. You've probably seen it in your ready-to-wear clothes. And when I am sewing wovens, I'll sew the seam with my regular sewing machine and then trim off the seam allowances as I do this overlocker serger stitch. You can see it here as well. And sergers can also create some specialty stitches. So here you see this is a rolled hem stitch created with my serger, and it creates a very narrow hem and trims off the fabric on those ends. You can also use most 4-thread overlocker serger machines to do this type of stitch here. This is called a flat lock stitch. And on the outside, it looks a lot like these serger stitches, but it is joining those seams together so that you can see kind of on the inside here, that seam on the other side is perfectly flat. And this is a good construction method sometimes for things that are going to fit really tightly, particularly if you have sensitive skin, because those seams lay very flat against your body on the inside, and then they're kind of decorative looking on the outside. We're not going to cover flat locking, rolled hems, those types of things today. That is going to be advanced serger skills. Today we are covering the absolute basics. So let's start by talking about the parts of a serger. So both of these machines have generally the same parts. Where they differ is in price and some other features that we can talk about later. But they both have, this piece up here is called a thread tree. And you can see on this machine it goes around an angle, on this one it's in a straight line, but it's the same type of thing. They both have tension discs. These are to set the tension there. This one has automatic tension. So I actually use this tool over here to set the automatic tension on the machine. They have, I'm gonna open this machine up and let's open this one up as well. So the way they create that looped finish around the edge, which is also inherently stretchy. So it's great for sewing knit fabrics because the stitch stretches. You don't have to do anything special to it to make it stretch. And the reason they do that, or the reason they're able to do that, is these pieces here. Those are called loopers. On this machine, here is the lower looper and here is the upper looper. And those wrap that thread around the edge of the fabric as we saw on the sample seams that I was showing you. We also have, of course, the presser foot, the feed dogs, just like a regular sewing machine. Let me turn this one here to the side. So right here we have the stitch width selector. This is going to be a narrow stitch width, this is going to be wide, and this will subsequently cut more fabric off your seam allowance as well when you're going narrow, because it's got to cut more to keep that narrow stitching. This is the stitch length selector, so this would be a very short stitch, these would be longer stitches, and this is called a differential feed mechanism here. And what that does is it puts a different amount of tension on the upper and lower parts of the fabric, so it might stretch the fabric as it's feeding through, or it might squish the fabric together as it's feeding through. And in more advanced techniques, you can use this for things like gathering. And then on this machine here, I've got the knife release. So if I don't want the knife to be used on my seam, I'll pull the lever this way. To have the knife be used, which is the usual setting, it's going to be this way. And this feature is one I actually missed because this machine doesn't have it. It has a free arm here. So when you're stitching something small, like a cuff, you can put it around this free arm and it is a lot easier to sew. And then on this machine over here, we have this raises and lowers the presser foot. And This is the flywheel to turn the needles towards or away from you. And up here is the presser foot tension. So you can screw it in to make the presser foot have more pressure, and you can let it go to have less pressure. Same basic parts on this machine. Some of them are in a few different places. This is the presser foot up and down here. If we look, we've got the lower looper, and turn it so you can see it. Here's the upper looper. We've got the needles, we've got the presser foot. I have settings here on the inside. I've got my knife lock to turn off the knife and turn it back on, and then my stitch length and width selectors are these buttons, and then like I said, the tension is controlled here. This one also has this extra set of mechanisms here because it has something called air threading, and that is to thread the lower loopers without actually having to poke the thread through them by hand. It uses air to shoot the thread through those loopers. Speaking of thread, let's talk about how to thread your machine. I'm going to thread this machine because this one's actually a little more complicated than this machine, since this machine has the air threading. And because this is more of a beginner machine, so it's more common for beginners to start with this type of machine when they're first getting into using a serger or an overlocker. I'm going to be threading with different types of thread here, different colors of thread here, so that you can see which thread goes into which path. Now, importantly, on some machines, including this one, you have to thread your threads in a certain order or your tension will be all off and your machine will stitch terribly and get tangled and you will get very frustrated. So it really does pay to look at your manual and see if it matters which order you thread your parts in, because as you can see, we're going to put in 4 different threads and the order matters on this machine. On this machine, it doesn't matter. It's designed so that you can thread in any order you want and it will still work, and that's part of the automatic tension features on this one. So, thread tree all the way up. I'm going to open up the front panel here. I've got the presser foot up. I have raised the needles using the flywheel so that they're in the most up position and the looper is not crossing in front of the needle. I want it to the side there. And then what I'm going to do on this machine, the upper looper has to be threaded first, and that is this thread path. So I'm going to take my thread, I'm going to put it under, there's a little metal clip here, and then let me adjust the camera so that you can see the tension release buttons at the top here. Once you get the thread down to the lower part here, you can follow this green path to finish threading. So I'm going to go into this hook here, and only this hook, not this one, has the green dot on top. So I go under just that one hook, over this hook here, and then I am going to, let me zoom in. Here is my upper looper, and I'm going to go through the hole on it. And then most sergers come with these angled tweezers, and these are great for pulling the thread through. So I'm going to pull that to the back, and I want to go underneath the presser foot. The next path that needs to be threaded is the lower looper. So I'm going to take my thread through the thread tree, under the metal clip, pull my tension release, let it go. The lower looper follows the blue path. So I am going to go behind this hook. I'm going to go under both of these hooks because they both have a blue dot on top, over this hook. So you pull this piece out and you take the thread behind that little bar, push it in, and then here is the lower looper here, and I want to just poke my thread through the hole, and you can use the tweezers to pull it through to the back. Next we go with the right needle path. So it starts out the same as the first two. Now I'm going to take this thread behind these two bars around this thing. It's a lot like threading a regular sewing machine at this point. Behind this bar, and then through the right needle. Okay, this hooked piece here, this is the knife, and I want to go in between the knife and the presser foot, right in there, and then underneath the presser foot and towards the back. And I'm going to thread the left needle in the same way. All right, so I've got all 4 of my threads pulled to the back. I'm going to close the front cover, turn my machine on, and I'm going to go ahead and lower my presser foot. Unlike a regular sewing machine where it is really not recommended that you stitch without fabric in there, on a serger you can do that without damaging anything, and that's actually how I like to start to check the chain that is forming. So I'm going to go ahead and press my presser foot. And if I threaded it right, I should start getting a chain coming out of the back here. Let's talk about starting and stopping your seams. You may notice that I wasn't lifting the presser foot when I did that chaining off. And you actually don't need to lift the presser foot when you begin stitching on your fabric. Once you get your fabric like close to that edge of the presser foot, if you just start stitching, it will get sucked in. And you can see the knife is cutting this little edge off. Now, on a normal sewing machine, you would stop here as soon as the needle gets past the fabric and then you pull it out and cut. Well, if I lift my presser foot, you'll see I can't actually pull my fabric out yet. What I need to do is chain off the fabric. And then once I have enough of a chain, I can come out here and cut it off. So here's a quick serger rethreading tip if you are rethreading your loopers. You don't have to go through the whole thread pathway again if you are already threaded. You can snip your thread back underneath the thread tree. And because I'm switching to a cone type thread, I'm gonna add this thread cone onto my spool so that it will hold it in place. And then all I need to do is go ahead and bring my new serger thread, the white here, I'm gonna bring it up through the thread tree. I am going to tie my 2 thread ends together. I'm just making a knot. Once these are tied together, then all you need to do is start chaining, and it's gonna pull this thread through your tension disc and through the thread path. And once you see the new thread color on your chain, you can snip it and go ahead and continue sewing. So that's a serger tip. I have one more tip for your serger, and that is having to do with pins and clips. I try, if at all possible, not to use pins on anything I'm going to put in the serger. And the reason is, when I first started using my serger, I had to buy a new knife replacement and get that fixed because I serged right through a pin, it cut my pin, an end of the pin flew back at me, and it broke the knife. So even if you think you're going to stop and pull the pins out, like, I just try not to use them at all. If you are going to use pins though, what I recommend is that you put them in your fabric going this way. That is less likely to get caught by the serger. When I cut mine, I was going this way like I normally would pin for the sewing machine. So don't do that for a serger. You want to pin this way so that your pin doesn't get stuck in the knife. The other thing though that I really recommend, instead of pinning, I prefer using these clips. You can use these little wonder clips and they can clip your fabric pieces together. And as you can see, if that gets up here by the presser foot, it's just not going to go. And like, you're not going to be able to forget that you put this pin there or this clip there the way that you could forget that you've put a pin. So when I'm serging, if I need to hold two pieces of fabric together, I use clips, not pins. If you do have to use pins, remember to pin parallel to your seam instead of perpendicular. So that's Serger 101. I'm going to do another lesson next week to show you how to handle corners and curves and sewing around, like a sleeve cuff, for example. Check out this playlist to see more sewing tips, tricks, and questions answered as you're learning to sew.